Translator. Dark Angel. Editor. Kurisu. The second stratagem he had devised was destruction, then rebirth. He first had to shatter all 9 great origin nuclei, and from their ruins forge a single vast origin nucleus that would become the evasive one. This was in accord with the world's Dao. It was not some impulse born in the heat of blood, yet he could already foresee that to truly enact it would be far harder than any thought he could easily summon. Those 9 great origin nuclei were the very wellspring of his strength. If he truly smashed them all in one stroke, the power birthed from their simultaneous annihilation would be enough to kill him 1,000 times over, 10,000 times over. So there was no need to even speak of forming the evasive one at that point. The reason Ling Han dared to do this was because Big Boss Black Tower still sat within his Dantian. That Big Boss had shattered his flesh in his last life just to force him to cultivate the indestructible Heaven Scroll, then made him seize a new body and be reborn. What kind of might was that, and what did it care for a mere one? Now he intended to self-destruct his origin nuclei. Big Boss Black, will you interfere or not? You definitely have to interfere, right? Then everything was settled. Ling Han was a bit shameless. Yet there was no other road. This was the first attempt in history to break through to the 10th layer of the element-gathering tier, and he did not even know what the correct path was to reach his aim. Thus, he could only lean on the Black Tower. Otherwise, there would be only a 1 in a million chance he would succeed. How could he dare gamble with such odds? Come on, then. He guided the origin nuclei in his Dantian and began the act of destruction. In truth, it was exceedingly easy. Each great nucleus was composed of 5 smaller origin nuclei of different elemental alignments, and those smaller nuclei maintained a marvelous equilibrium. He only needed to break that balance. The 5 elements would run wild, and naturally the origin nucleus would self-destruct. Not one by one, but all at once. Destruction was always easier than construction. In only an instant, all the origin nuclei began to quiver. The 5 elements both augmented and restrained one another. They began to stagger, like the foundations of a towering skyscraper that had suffered grievous damage and now stood on the brink of collapse. Hong, hong, hong. The 5 origin nuclei shattered one after another. Yet their blast did not burst outward. Instead, it was forced inward, as if each formed its own black hole. From an immense structure, they contracted into tiny spheres. Ling Han's spirit and heart trembled. He already sensed the arrival of external power. Black Tower! His consciousness swept through his Dantian, and he saw that the usually calm and ordinary Black Tower was now emitting a pale radiance. Golden script flickered across its body. Yet Ling Han could not recognize even half a character, just like when he first encountered the indestructible Heaven Scroll, which required 10,000 years merely to comprehend. No. 10,000 years had only been enough to comprehend the first layer of that cultivation technique. Wave after wave of power surged from the Black Tower and acted upon those 45 origin nuclei of his. It was precisely this power that made the explosive force compress inward instead of erupting outward in a cataclysm. Otherwise, his Dantian would have been utterly destroyed by the aftermath. A smile rose at the corners of Ling Han's lips. Indeed, he had gambled correctly. The Black Tower had made its move. He had tried many things before, yet the Black Tower had shown no reaction. That was because those attempts would not threaten Ling Han's life or cultivation, so Big Boss Black naturally could not be bothered. But if Ling Han induced the self-destruction of his origin nuclei, wouldn't that mean the 10,000 years of preparation Big Boss Black had spent would be completely wasted? He hurriedly crushed the distracting thoughts and began merging the corresponding origin nuclei together. Earth with earth, fire with fire, and so on. In the end, the 45 origin nuclei were reformed into 5 great origin nuclei of different alignments. They still seemed very small, because each origin nucleus was formed from 9 points, far from even 1/1,000,000th of his most flourishing period. Yet the power concealed within them was incomparably terrifying. Ling Han's thoughts shifted, and a strange idea suddenly appeared. Could he actually merge these origin nuclei of different elemental alignments into one, becoming a single origin nucleus, the only one existing in his Dantian? That would fit the concept of the evasive one. Again, he began merging the 5 newly reborn origin nuclei. but the difficulty of doing so was terrifyingly high. Each origin nucleus was formed from 9 smaller origin nuclei and was already filled with frightening power. Moreover, the 5 elements were independent of each other. First of all, water and fire stood on completely opposing sides. How could he merge them? Ling Han halted and began to ponder. Each element in this world was wholly independent. If one attempted to force them together, they would naturally repel. Yet at the same time, the 5 elements augmented and restrained one another, so it was not entirely impossible for them to be fused. As the saying goes, Dao gave birth to 1, 1 gave birth to 2, 2 gave birth to 3, and 3 gave birth to all things. All things could return to 1, the source of Dao. However, the world would not allow mere mortals to grasp the source of Dao. Thus the saying of the evasive one came to be. He dared to destroy the 9 origin nuclei and merge them back into 1, and this conformed to the theory of the evasive one. Yet these 5 origin nuclei were not the true one, nor the true Dao. This was built upon his understanding of the martial Dao from his last life as a heaven-tier elite. Otherwise, who would dare attempt such a feat? The 5 elements augmented one another and evolved into all things. Then, if he wished to return them to 1, he had to retrace the steps and make use of the fact that the 5 elements also restrained one another. Ling Han's eyes slowly brightened. He knew what he had to do. He had to let the 5 elemental origin nuclei restrain one another, swallow one another, and in the end there would only be 1 remaining. The one that had been merged from all 5 elemental origin nuclei. This was easy to say, yet to enact it, he had to ensure the 5 elemental origin nuclei maintained perfect balance as they devoured one another. Otherwise, even the slightest error would render all his previous efforts worthless, and he would have no way to return to the sole evasive one. In short, he could only succeed. Failure was not permitted. It was extremely challenging, and he liked it. The 5 elements restrained one another. Gold restrained wood, wood restrained earth, earth restrained water, water restrained fire, and fire restrained gold, all at once. The 5 elements mixed. Chaos lotus fluttered, drawing in spiritual chi. The chi coursed through his veins and gathered in his dantian, delivering fresh energy. Ling Han stirred the 5 elemental origin nuclei and took the final step. The gold origin nucleus began to swallow the wood origin nucleus, and the wood origin nucleus began to swallow the earth origin nucleus. And at last, the fire origin nucleus swallowed the gold origin nucleus, forming an unbreakable chain. Ling Han's consciousness clearly saw the 5 origin nuclei all shrinking, slowly merging together until they formed a new origin nucleus. Gold, wood, water, fire, and earth. All 5 elements were present, yet united. He succeeded. Ling Han abruptly opened his eyes and felt his entire body aching. He did not even have the strength to stand, as if his body had weakened to an extreme. Yet on the other hand, his spirit stood at the highest level in history. An utterly strange contrast. He opened the door and called out lightly. When the words left his mouth, he realized his voice had become low and rough, so much so that he could barely recognize it as his own. Ling Han. Shu Hunyu's ears were too sharp, and she raced in from outside. With a pang, she crashed into Ling Han's arms. The collision was too fierce, no weaker than an explosion, and Ling Han was instantly knocked to the ground by the force. Hunyu did not care. She rubbed her small face against him, then said, Ling Han mean. Not playing with Niu. Ling Han, if you stayed in seclusion a few more days, Hunyu would probably have starved to death. Another person entered. It was Lu Yutong. She shook her head and said, You went into seclusion for a whole month, almost making her die of worry. A month? Ling Han was stunned. As he remembered it, only 10 days had passed. Could it be that his merging of the 5 elemental origin nuclei at the end had taken a full 20 days? No wonder he was so weak. After all, he had not eaten or drunk for so many days. Bring me some fruits. I need to replenish my energy, or I really will die, he said. You're weird, brat. Guang Yuang heard the commotion and walked in as well. When he looked at Ling Han, it was as if he were looking at a monster. Translator. Dark Angel. Kurisu Guang Yuan said, If an ordinary martial artist at the Element Gathering tier shut himself away for a whole month, he'd have long since rotted into a corpse. Yet you, brat, can still open that mouth and speak. This is truly bizarre. His gaze burned into Ling Han like fire, as though he wished for nothing more than to carve Ling Han open and conduct a thorough dissection. In truth, during the first 10 days Ling Han had still eaten, but in the 20 days after that he had not taken even a single bite. Even he himself had not noticed time flowing past. He had only been fusing the 5 elemental origin nuclei, and when he emerged after succeeding, he realized that 20 days had slipped by. At that time, he had been in an exceedingly wondrous state, where spiritual qi served as his provisions, sustaining his vitality. After a martial artist stepped into the flower-blossoming tier, he needed only to draw in spiritual qi to live. Because after breaking into flower blossoming, one's very level of existence underwent a complete transformation, and one no longer had to rely on food. Previously, he had fused the 5 element origin nuclei to seize that elusive one, and in doing so, he had momentarily united with the Tao of this world, equivalent to temporarily raising the level of his being to that realm. Thus, he had entered that state ahead of time. However, now that he had withdrawn from that state, hunger and weakness struck him at once. Lu Yutong brought over some fruit, and Ling Han immediately began to eat. He had to first stuff his belly with fruit before touching meat, otherwise his body would not be able to endure it. Guangyuan stared fixedly at Ling Han, feeling again and again that something was not right. He abruptly clapped his hands, then cried out, "That's it! Why has your cultivation fallen back to the first layer of element gathering tier?" Before, this brat had clearly been at the 9th layer of element gathering tier. When a martial artist went into seclusion, it was to break through to a higher realm. Yet even if the attempt failed, one's cultivation should not regress in the slightest, let alone plunge from the 9th layer all the way down to the 1st. This was practically unheard of. In the entire martial world, what other person could do such a thing? Lu Yutong's heart tightened. She examined Ling Han closely, and indeed sensed from the aura in his dantian that there was only a single origin nucleus. Her face instantly went pale. But when she thought that Ling Han must feel worse than she did, she hurriedly soothed him. "It's all right. With your cultivation speed, it will only take 2 to 3 months to return to the 9th layer." Ling Han smiled faintly. He naturally understood his own condition. Though there truly was only one origin nucleus in his dantian, he was several times stronger than when he had been at the 9th layer of element gathering tier. Yet he did not explain. This matter involved far too much. Moreover, even if he spoke, it was likely no one would believe him. "That's not right!" Guangyuan grew flustered, his eyes locked on Ling Han's dantian as if trying to bore through it, and he said, "You are clearly only at the 1st layer of element gathering tier, but why is it that I feel such terrifying pressure from you, as if I am facing someone at the 1st layer of gushing spring tier?" A 1st layer element gathering martial artist could compare to a 1st layer gushing spring martial artist? If he said such words in public, he would definitely be beaten senseless. People would think he'd drunk himself muddle-headed and were trying to sober him up. However, Ling Han nodded inwardly. Spiritual ocean tier was spiritual ocean tier after all. His eyes truly were sharp. "Ha, how could that be? My eyes must have gone blurry." Guangyuan laughed loudly, then slapped his own head. "Pooh," Ling Han nearly choked. He had just praised Guangyuan's keen sight, and in the next breath, this fellow had slapped that praise back into his own face. "Right. There was a silly brat who came looking for you a few days ago. He said something about fulfilling the promise of a month. He has to go handle something first. Then he will come back to await your orders," Guangyuan said. "Oh, that would be Zhu Wuju. He has broken through to gushing spring tier. He said he was going to handle something. Then he must have gone to challenge Nangongji. He truly was a loyal man." Ling Han nodded inwardly. If Zhu Wuju did not have such a temperament, at most, Ling Han would have passed him the Silver Moon Race cultivation technique and sent him away. How could he possibly be allowed to remain at his side? How could just anyone have the qualification to stay with him and be commanded by him? After eating more fruit, Ling Han gradually recovered some strength. After a while, he began to eat a full meal. Hu Nu did not mind accompanying him at the table. As a result, she ate 10 times what he ate. And this was merely the little girl casually accompanying him for the meal. Ling Han excused himself, saying he intended to cultivate. Alone, he went into the small forest outside. He wanted to conduct a complete assessment of his current power. He gathered his origin power into his fist. When it reached its limit, he suddenly punched out. The force erupted, and it actually condensed into a solid fist the size of a human's, which shot forward through the air. Peng, peng, peng. More than 10 thick trees ahead were toppled by the blow, crashing down with a plume of dust. Ling Han drew back his fist, satisfaction faintly showing on his face. The might of this punch was indeed comparable to the attack of a martial artist in the early stage of the first layer of Gushing Spring Tier, just as though the 10th layer of Element Gathering Tier was the first layer of Gushing Spring Tier. Breaking through from Element Gathering to Gushing Spring is a solid leap in strength. There is at least a 10-fold increase. Then by the time I truly break through into Gushing Spring, my strength should be able to compare to the 6th or 7th layer, not to mention my battle prowess. The higher the cultivation, the more difficult it becomes to challenge those above you. Yet after fusing the origin nuclei, my ability to fight stronger opponents has instead increased. When I was at the first layer of Element Gathering Tier, I only had about 5 to 6 stars of battle prowess. With such overwhelming strength to support me, wouldn't I be able to begin cultivating a black-grade martial arts technique? Ling Han's heart stirred. If he could wield a black-grade technique at this stage, it would be a terrifying surge in battle prowess. Let's give it a try. He sifted through the vault of memories in his mind, searching for a technique suited to him. However, because he was aligned to all 5 elements, aside from lightning element, martial techniques, he could essentially cultivate any kind. Thus, there was an abundance of choices. Then I'll use this one. 3 styles of black origin. This is the sword art that fellow, the Sword Emperor, once used. Rumor says that it was precisely while contemplating this sword art that he formed Sword Ray. When he came begging me for alchemical pills, I demanded this sword technique in exchange. It was merely an impulse at the time, yet I never imagined I would truly put it to use. He sat down cross-legged and began to dissect this sword technique within his mind. This was a black-grade high-level martial art. Yet even among black-grade high-level techniques, there were still superior and inferior. Some were so formidable they were actually close to Earth grade. If there were a scale from 1 to 10 points to rate techniques, then most black-grade high-level martial arts would rank below 5, while occasionally there would be a few worth 6 or 7. However, the Black Origin Sword technique was worth 10 points. It was only a small step away from Earth grade. It could be called the strongest technique for anyone who had not yet reached Spiritual Pedestal Tier. However, its words were dense and twisting, exceedingly difficult to comprehend. Thankfully, though Ling Han was only at the Element Gathering Tier, his understanding of martial arts was truly at Heaven Tier. Perhaps Heaven grade techniques would still be a strain, but Earth grade? That was naturally child's play to him, much less a technique merely close to Earth grade. First style, Mysterious 3000. Ling Han drew his sword and began to move. His motions were obviously crude, lacking in power. In fact, he even staggered a little to either side. If anyone had witnessed it, they would likely have laughed until they fell over. The Sword Emperor was truly a madman. To learn this sword technique while only at Element Gathering Tier, he cursed inwardly. Even with Heaven Tier comprehension, cultivating this sword art still taxed him somewhat, which showed what kind of monster the Sword Emperor was. But he was also thinking too much. How could the Sword Emperor have mastered this technique in a single day? Ling Han continued to brandish his sword without end, and his swordplay grew smoother and smoother. After all, he was still an ultimate elite of Heaven Tier practicing the Blade of Doctrine. It would be strange if this were not the outcome. Shoo, shoo, shoo! He swept his sword, and a surge of origin power shot out, merging with the spiritual chi of the surroundings, then actually transformed into several dozen razor-sharp swords that flew forward to strike. Peng! The earth groaned and trembled, and the trees ahead collapsed in swathes. Ling Han stood dumbfounded. What a terrifying sword technique!